Welcome into Vandy on SI. I'm Joey Dwyer here with Dylan Tovitz. Dylan, a big week and a lot for us to talk about. Vanderbilt didn't play over the weekend, but I think a pretty significant weekend in terms of the results that it got and the chances that it can make the college football playoff if it wins out from here. Vanderbilt sits at 8-2. It's got to get to 10-2 to have any chance. I think we both think that, and I don't think there's any way around that. It is interesting though. The precedent is non-existent for an SEC team with two losses not getting into the playoff. Last year, all of them got in the playoff, and Alabama was 10-3 or was 9-3 and barely missed the playoff. Like was right on the bubble. That conversation went
Yeah.
throughout the entire summer. Vanderbilt could go into the playoff with two losses and not get in though, based off of kind of how the SEC has played this year. Less top heavy than it was last year, I think, in a lot of ways. And I think there's just more parity in that kind of second group, which Vanderbilt's in right now, alongside Oklahoma, alongside Texas, alongside a lot of other teams that are kind of in the middle there. Vanderbilt was hurt this weekend as Alabama lost to Oklahoma. It felt like that could have knocked Oklahoma out of the field. Texas picked up its third loss, which helped Vanderbilt. But again, and not a whole lot of help that it received this weekend. Notre Dame beats Pitt, and I don't know, Dylan. It's interesting because we thought all along if they get to two losses after Thanksgiving, it probably works itself out. I don't know for sure that that's the case anymore. I think they do need some help, but their resume isn't as strong as it was, and not to be doom and gloom here because they certainly can get in and they certainly can still do enough the rest of the way to help their resume. I think you beat Tennessee and you have a better resume than Utah or BYU, and you jump one of them, and then I don't see how Texas would get in with three losses over them if they beat Tennessee on the road. But looking at their wins right now, they don't have that, I guess, signature win on their resume right now. South Carolina, we thought was a really good win. South Carolina's not in the college football playoff top 25. LSU, we thought was a great win. They don't have a head coach right now. They're not in the top 25 either. Same thing with Missouri, although Missouri does still have a coach. And man, Vanderbilt needs Missouri to help them out by beating Oklahoma. So, Dylan, an interesting kind of state of the union here is I think we're slowly starting to realize that Vanderbilt's resume may not be as strong as may we had thought it was, but certainly not declaring this program dead at this point. All it's got to do right now is focus on winning the next two. We have to discuss these possibilities though, because I think they do need some help the rest of the way, even if it's not as drastic as it seemed when Oklahoma lost on Saturday, or when Oklahoma won on Saturday. Sorry.
Yeah, Joey, they definitely are going to need some help. I think, I just said this before we started, but I think, they still have a very good chance of making it if they win these next two games. So I don't necessarily think it's like they need a miracle to happen because you think about it, I mean, BYU is going to be hard to jump. They're one that's going to be hard to jump, but they could feasibly lose to Cincinnati. They could also likely lose to Texas Tech. In the Big 12 championship, but I don't know if that fully allows Vanderbilt to jump them. Utah, I think if Vanderbilt goes into Neyland Stadium, obviously beats Kentucky, goes into Neyland Stadium and beats Tennessee, I think Utah has an easy schedule remaining. Like to me, that would be a hard sell that Vanderbilt doesn't jump Utah in that case. They're already ahead of them in the AP poll. Like I don't necessarily think that gap is very big at all right now, which makes me think that if Vanderbilt, can go into Tennessee and beat them in that last week of the season, as well as beat Kentucky, they would jump them. And then, like you said, they probably need a little bit of help, whether it's, Oklahoma. There are a lot of scenarios that could still happen here. We could have, Oklahoma again can lose to either Missouri or LSU. And, I've been thinking about the argument where it's like, could a 9-3 Texas get in over Vanderbilt? Could a 9-3 Alabama get in? Because that's another thing that could, by the way, Auburn looked really good when he played Vanderbilt. Now it's Alabama Auburn in the Iron Bowl for Auburn's fighting for bowl eligibility. They have 5 wins. Like that's a game that Alabama could very easily lose, especially if they're spiraling a little bit. Like to me, it's a really hard sell also to hear that like a 9-3 team would get in over a 10-2 Vanderbilt.
Right.
Because if you think about Vanderbilt's losses, like they're about as good as you can get. Like we're not talking about Vanderbilt that, lost to unranked Virginia Tech or lost to, Georgia State like they did last year. Like they lost to Texas on the road and they lost to Alabama on the road. And yes, both these teams did lose last week. So maybe that's not as impressive as it looked the week before, but they lost to Texas by 3 points on the road, and they basically lost to Alabama by it was 9 points until Jam Miller scored that touchdown to make it 16. But that was also a close game. Like Vanderbilt is not a bad loss. It's like we talk about Texas. Like Texas lost to unranked Florida. Um, I believe, unless I think they did, right? I'm pretty sure.
Yes.
Um, and like Vanderbilt is, not lost to an unranked team. They've won every game at home. Like I, I personally think it would be tough to tell them that, you know, a 9-3 SEC team is going to get in over you based on what Vanderbilt's done. And I think if they go 10-2, they still have a good shot at it. They're going to need some help, but it's not crazy to think that it happens. But obviously they have to go. Kentucky's not going to be easy. They have to beat Kentucky at home, and Kentucky's been on the rise. They've won three straight. They beat Auburn. Only allowed 3 points to them after Vanderbilt's defense allowed 38 last week. And then obviously Tennessee the last game is going to be a quite the atmosphere, especially if Tennessee is also playing for some stuff on the line there. But that's going to be if Vanderbilt, fans and the Vanderbilt community like gets to that game, like where you pretty much have your college football playoff hopes on the line, whether you're guaranteed to get in with a win or not. Um, that's going to be like a really, I think, really special game and could be a really special atmosphere for Vanderbilt fans. I mean, you think about the most important games in Vanderbilt history, and I'm not even just talking Vanderbilt football history, but maybe not to loop baseball into this, but Vanderbilt sports history in general, like that's certainly up
Mhm.
there, Joey. So again, a lot to look forward to these next 2 weeks, but it definitely does depend on some other situations with some other teams as well.
Yeah, I want to, before we move on, I want to hit on the Texas thing real quick. It's interesting. The resumes are just so different. Where Texas has three losses,
Yeah.
right? They have the bad loss to Florida. And for that reason, I would put Vanderbilt ahead of them. I don't see the reason to put a three-loss team in over Vanderbilt. I think you would set a pretty poor precedent there by putting a three-loss team in this early into, I guess, this model of the playoff. But also, like, they do have a great win against Oklahoma, and let's say Texas ends the year with three losses, they would beat Texas A&M and M and give them their only loss. Now, do I think that's going to happen? I think we both would probably guess that that won't happen, and this argument will be null and void. But I think the committee really has an interesting precedent to set there if those are kind of the last two teams on the bubble. I don't know that it's going to be that way, but certainly interesting. Like you said, BYU is going to be tough to pass. I think if they beat Tennessee at Neyland, they pass Utah. So I don't know that if I'm a Vanderbilt fan, I'm super worried about Utah. I don't think Miami's going to jump them. I think that's hard to see. The only team that I don't know that they will, but I would watch Georgia Tech a little bit. Like if Georgia Tech goes and wins the ACC and ends the year with one loss, that's an interesting team that could maybe jump some people. Again, though, like I don't think Notre Dame's going to lose another game. I think they're probably pretty firmly in, and then everybody else above them has one loss or less. So I think probably the top nine or so are set-ish. Alabama, even if they lose to Auburn, would have two losses. So I would guess that Alabama would probably still be in the playoff, even if they were on the bubble a little bit.
They have,
Although that's a bad loss, so I don't know.
I thought they'd have, didn't they lose?
Oh, they lost. This was I don't know. My browser didn't update. This was before Oklahoma, so
Yeah,
yeah,
they'd
they
have
have two losses now. So Auburn would knock them out. I don't brain fart there for whatever reason. Alabama would be out if Auburn beats them,
yeah,
and we all know that anything can happen in that matchup.
right.
No matter how good each team is, we've seen precedent for Auburn beating Alabama when Auburn's terrible, and I don't know that Alabama's terrible very often, but some really good Alabama teams have faltered in those games. So who knows what happens there? Good correction out of you because for some reason this had not updated. I guess because they don't announce it until a
Yeah.
couple of days from now. But yeah, it's interesting. Like I don't know if there's a whole lot of wiggle room here, but if we know anything about college football's last couple of weeks, I think we know that something's going to happen that we don't expect, and I think Vanderbilt's kind of betting on that right now. You tweeted something from Vegas, a 23.81% chance that Vanderbilt makes the playoff. It's interesting to think about what the chances would be if Vanderbilt goes and wins the next two games. You'd have to think it's considerably higher than 23%. I've heard some variance in numbers, but I don't know if you've got anything there. It is interesting to think maybe how those numbers would be adjusted. Because I think people are too caught up on the snapshot here of like, oh, there's a 23% chance they make the playoff, and all this. But I think you got to look at it and say if they beat Tennessee at Neyland, if they beat a Kentucky team that's hot, although wouldn't help them all that much on the resume, I think they're in better standing in 2 weeks than they are right now, and I think that's got to be considered as well.
Absolutely. And, I think I'm glad you brought up that point because I think at the end of the day, like they need to win these two games. And like you said, so much can happen in college football that like if you're Vanderbilt, and again, there's not a doubt in my mind based on everything we've seen and heard that they're not focusing on all this outside noise. And, was Vanderbilt watching some of these games hoping for, an Alabama win and a Georgia win? Probably, but they're focused on winning these next two games. And to your point about the percentages, Joey, I do think that ticked up a little bit when I checked this morning, and it's closer to like 18 to 20% now. But I'm glad you brought up that point because those are, obviously it's well known that Vanderbilt needs to win these next two games to even have a shot. So if you think about those odds in a theoretical world where they beat Kentucky at home, which probably won't help their odds that much because they're 9.5 point favorites.
But you're just taking an outcome off the board there, which is
Right.
helpful.
But also Tennessee, like they're, if they're projecting odds for that, like Vanderbilt will likely be an underdog in that game. Like my guess is, 3 point, 4 point underdog on the road at Tennessee. If they win that game, then that's already, slashing half those odds and like you said, eliminating um an outcome. So I do think if they win, the Vegas odds, whatever, probably have them closer to around 50%, maybe a little higher. And I think they obviously will need some help, but at the end of the day, it's about going in and winning these next two games and putting that pressure on the committee. And I kind of think that really has to be the focus. Because there, like you said, there's so much that can happen, now. Um, there's just so much that could go awry in these last 2 weeks, and it's the beauty of college football, and it's a special thing for Vanderbilt fans because as a fan, I think there's nothing better than being, having it be Thanksgiving and you're still invested in your team and you're, it reminds me of like, this was Vanderbilt kind of a little bit in March Madness selection last year when they were on that bubble for a while and then thought they were definitely in. And then like that thrill is like a pretty special thing for Vanderbilt students, for Vanderbilt fans. So just the fact that again they're in these conversations is pretty cool and definitely should deserve a reflection. And I think they win these next two games, like we've said, not to sound like a broken record, but it's very possible. It's not miracle like, this is a team that deserves to and frankly should get in at 10-2. Whether the rest of the field shakes up to make that possible remains to be seen. But definitely, got to start this weekend with Kentucky, which, like we've said, is not a slam dunk game at all. Though I think Vanderbilt coming off the bye will be prepared, Joey.
Yeah, Vanderbilt nearly a 10-point favorite for that game. Will be really interesting to see what Kentucky team we get at First Bank Stadium that day. Is it the team that lost 4 games in a row down the stretch to South Carolina, Georgia, Texas, Tennessee? Obviously, that's a gauntlet, and one of those games was a one possession game with Texas. I went to overtime. Recently, though, I think the schedule's let up a little bit. You're starting to see maybe Kentucky's a little better than we had initially thought. Even early in the year, they lost to Ole Miss by 7, beat Auburn in a grinder, and then go and kind of blow the brakes off Florida, put up 38 points, and then Tennessee Tech rather insignificant, although Tennessee Tech was undefeated heading into that game. I think Kentucky's offense is interesting because PFF grades it out really well. The I guess the interesting thing is their quarterback, really tough. I think is made of the right stuff. But Dylan, I don't know that Vanderbilt. If Vanderbilt plays anywhere near an A game, it should beat Kentucky. I don't think there's any question about that. Interesting though, Kentucky has won in a few different ways recently.
Yeah, for sure. And you don't want Vanderbilt to get complacent, look ahead to Tennessee because it is a really good football team, like you said, Joey. And I think they've gone under the radar and are a better team still than people give them credit for. But I would agree, Vanderbilt goes out there and they're quicker on their feet after the bye and they get some guys back and you see any sort of sign of resistance. I think the defense, it's a really important game for the defense because they're trending right now in the direction of, frankly, after the Auburn game, like can this defense stop anything is kind of the question right now. Um, so if this is a Kentucky team that goes in and they have a good offense, but this should not be a team that's putting up 40 points
Right.
against Vanderbilt in their home stadium. I think if they do that, then we might be having some different conversations that are not college football playoff
Yeah, right.
necessarily related. But this is a game that the offense should be able to take over pretty easily. The Vanderbilt offense, in my mind. The Kentucky defense isn't bad, but I think at home and in the situation, fresh legs, with a healthy Pavia, there's and again a strong offensive line that should be able to move bodies pretty well there on the interior. I don't see a situation where Vanderbilt, drops this game, but also they have to go out there and execute like they always do. So you don't want to. Does have a little bit of that trap game. Don't want to look ahead to Tennessee already and post Thanksgiving because Kentucky is a really good team and they're obviously coming in here feeling pretty good about themselves off the three straight wins like I mentioned, and they want to come in here and win and play spoiler as well.
Yeah, it's interesting. Kentucky's run defense is fine, like 3 yards per carry for Auburn against them, 3.3 for Florida. We've talked a lot about good run defenses that Vanderbilt's seen though, and kind of shredded all of them. I don't really have much concern about Vanderbilt's offense
I'd
at
agree.
all against Kentucky. I think Kentucky's defense is fine. It's a Mark Stoops defense in a lot of ways where they'll make things challenging on you, but they're not going to have Alabama guys on the front seven. I think their run defense was better last year than it is this year, at least at this point of the season, maybe. Um, Here's the thing, Dylan. Like you're right, the defense is a story here. Where we talked all leading into the bye about how they probably needed their defense to rest more than their offense to rest. I think their offense was red hot and probably could have played 4 more games in a row. Their defense, though, I think wore down a lot. And I saw Dan Wilkin tweet like the bye week came at the perfect time for them because that's not the same defense that we had seen early in the year, even against teams that weren't that great or uh, teams that were better than we thought. I think it was still impressive looking back on what they did just because they shut down South Carolina and I think they shut down Virginia Tech for a half, things along those lines. I think they're better than they showed the last couple weeks, but we got to see it, man. Like this is the most important 2 game stretch of their regular season, I think. And if their defense doesn't come to play, they could easily drop one of these games. And I don't know that it's Kentucky as much as it is Tennessee, but uh, man, their defense, I think, really, we're gonna maybe get more of a sense of what they are relative to what they've shown the last couple weeks, just because of the bye. And if it looks like it did against Auburn, maybe there could be some trouble for Vanderbilt down the stretch here.
Yeah, and I'm looking to see what adjustments Steve Gregory makes, whether, schematic adjustments where they're blitzing more, which they had some success with, early in the season against South Carolina and a couple other teams, or specifically, I'm wondering what kind of personnel changes, if any, happen. I think it's become pretty clear that Martel Height is not their best cornerback. I think it would be, smart to see more Mark Davis on the field. I thought he's played really well for a few straight weeks now. I think no one could
He can
guard
play the
Cam.
way they want to play too, where he
Right,
can play man and
right,
press and all
exactly.
that.
Yeah, but no one could guard Cam Coleman on, last week against Auburn. I think Davis did the best job. I think he played him pretty well on that, insane toe drag he had, where it got overturned and became a catch afterwards. I think Jordan Matthews has played well. Colby Taylor's been okay, but I'm curious to see, do you get Davis in there more? Do you maybe get Matthews in there more? And then, excuse me, same thing kind of at the linebacker position. I think Bryce Cowan's played pretty well. If you look at the stat sheet, he's, kind of been blowing up the game without necessarily people realizing it. Tackle for losses and getting in the backfield. Curious, Brian Longwell's been really good as well, but do you maybe see more Cowan splitting time with, Langston Patterson, which is kind of crazy to see because Patterson's been one of their best defenders, but we haven't, I don't think, spoken about him that much. And I think Bryce Cowan's been more impactful than Patterson when he's been on the field. And the last question to me is, Miles Capers obviously got injured last game. I think he's okay. We didn't get anything to tell us otherwise on that.
Yeah,
But like Corday Sidnor played pretty much every snap, and like
yeah.
I can't remember really him getting much pressure on the quarterback at all. Like, do you maybe see more Keanu Code in there who did play a bit after Capers got hurt as that third edge rusher? But I do think as well. The schematic adjustments are the more important thing here. Are you blitzing more? Are you, again, I've talked about that soft zone. Are you fixing that soft zone, trying to stick more man? If so, do you have corners that can go do that? Are you playing too high safety? But also there's definitely, I think, some personnel adjustments um that can be made there. I think we're seeing more of Dante Carter, maybe over Marlon Sewell. There's some adjustments that are starting to, be seen a little bit more, and I'm just wondering, if after the bye week and resetting and thinking through the game plan, like, do we see some of those, personnel changes actually made in more of a impact. It won't be benching anybody, but Vanderbilt does this thing where they rotate their guys on defense anyways. So I'm just
Mhm.
curious. I wouldn't be shocked to see some of those snap percentages flip where we see, some more guys just trying to make a change because clearly what they did against Auburn and in the past couple weeks hasn't worked, Joey.
Yeah, I'll read through some grades here. The two best corners against Auburn were two of their four best players. Jordan Matthews was the third best player per PFF. Mark Davis was the fourth. Colby Taylor
Mhm.
was actually their fifth best player, it said. Um, and you look all the way down, 26 is where Martel Height was. He got a 45 grade. And that doesn't tell the entire story, but I think you saw he got picked on at times in that game. And I don't know that that's what we expected from Martel Height. And I think they want to give him more grace than that. But I mean, all their other corners essentially were in the top 10 except for Jalen Lackey. Marlon Jones was in there as well. Jalen Lackey was 19. Martel Height was their second to last ranked defensive player. I think at some point you've got to go away from your preconceived notion there and give more snaps to the other guys. And at times they did on Saturday. Jordan Matthews outsnapped Martel Height. Mark Davis played 23 to Height's 45. Lackey played 16, which I don't know that that makes much of an impact on this.
Yeah.
And then Marlon Jones, which they have him listed as a strong safety, which I don't really get. Played seven, so maybe take that with a grain of salt. But he's also coming back from the injury, and I don't know how healthy he is at this point. But yeah, point being, I wonder if Matthews and Davis maybe see a little bit of uptick there. Looking at linebackers, Longwell played 56 snaps, was their ninth ranked player. Patterson played 47 snaps, so you see again a little bit of a decrease. They had 86 total defensive snaps. He played 47. Not all that many. Bryce Cowan played 21 and graded out better than Patterson in those snaps. So interesting there. Keanu Coote, maybe the outlier here in terms of backups, was the worst graded player on the defense on Saturday. Uh, Miles Capers graded out as their 20th guy, and then um, let's see. Where's Corday Sidner? He played 71 snaps, which I think might have led the defense, like you had mentioned, and was their 14th best player, tied with Cowan. So take all that with a grain of salt. But interesting to kind of monitor some late season, maybe not position battles, but maybe some mixing and matching by Steve Gregory. Sewell still graded out better than Carter, played 57 snaps relative to Carter's 29. And Dylan, actually, Brandon Fontenette was their highest graded player, which I think kind of been waiting on for a while. Joshua Singh, two, which he's just a PFF darling at this point of the season. So, an interesting kind of undertone there defensively, but point blank, they've got to be better defensively if they're going to go 2-0 the rest of the way. I think the thing that I haven't seen as much from them as I thought. They've got to force more turnovers. They've got to have more explosives defensively. And Clark really talked about that in the offseason. We hadn't really seen that much recently, and I think that's an area of concern too. That buys you some margin for error. And if they're going to win in November, they've got to be more explosive. I think the depth is showing more, but this is the stretch that Clark really talked about all off seasons. Like you got to win these November games. Time to do it, Dylan.
Yeah, and I'm glad you brought up the turnovers there because I was gonna say the same thing. I think, the turnovers, the game changing plays, the momentum shifting plays is what they've been lacking. And especially, not to think ahead, but Tennessee, Joey Aguilar is a guy who could throw for 400 yards and throw three picks, and that's like an
Yeah.
average game for him. Like if Vanderbilt doesn't get those interceptions, then they're not gonna win. Like it's going to be, too fast pace of a game to not get those turnovers. And obviously they would help against Kentucky too. But definitely, and ultimately, I think it comes down to the pass rush
Mhm.
to force those turnovers because
Their
with
corners aren't good enough to just shut down.
right, exactly. And the way you force interceptions is not by, dropping 8, and like that usually is not how it happens. It's by, getting pressure on the quarterback, forcing him into an ill-advised throw, or getting a quarterback hit, ball goes out. Um, to me, that's where it starts, and I'm just not sure where it's coming from at this point. I think,
Hmm.
there is some pass rush on the interior with Josh Singh. I mean, he's been stronger in run defense, hasn't had much since he sacked, Ty Simpson, but the edge rushers, Capers is good if he's back healthy, but even he hasn't exactly been a game wrecker. Again,
Hmm.
we mentioned Sidnor, Keanu Coat, who was brought over pretty much to rush the passer on third downs. Like you said,
Hmm.
hasn't done that. He's, I said maybe he could play more, but he hasn't been very impactful either. Like you said, he was the worst graded player on the team or on the defense via PFF. So maybe it's about sending, more of those corner blitzes, what worked against South Carolina. I think they have the guys to do it between Fontenette and CJ Hurd, um, and a couple other corners that can come down there and throw another rusher in. But they have to get creative to figure out ways to get pressure on the quarterback. And I'm just not confident in their ability to get to the quarterback right now if they're rushing four, and it's
Right.
just about, especially with these some of these better offensive lines going forward. I just don't see it. Maybe it's about, it's another thing I think Bryce Cowan does really well. He's massive, he's athletic. I think he's probably more of a, wrecker inside, the front four than maybe a Langston Patterson is. But they do have to get creative, because that ultimately to me is the way to force turnovers, and you have to force turnovers to win some of these games, because putting these, long. The other thing is, without forcing turnovers, the defense is on the field a lot. You mentioned 86 snaps on defense. That is a lot of
Yeah.
snaps. Like they
Even
they
with overtime. What, overtime had like snaps for them or something?
Yeah, still, like they need to get off the field. They need to get stops on third down. They had massive third down issues against Auburn. There was that 3rd and 20 something in the first quarter that they let up on a screen pass. Like these are the things that they need to do, if nothing else, to give the defense, a break, because they were completely worn down by the end of that game. And um, that just can't happen going forward. And again, the offense is good enough where if you get them one or two stops, one or two turnovers, like everything tells us that they should be able to go out there and essentially win the game from there, Joey. So
Yeah, it's a good point. Dylan, it's going to be an interesting week here. We'll talk more about Kentucky as we go, but I think the real elephant in the room is, if Vanderbilt goes 2-0, will it matter? And I don't know that we know the answer to that at this point. I don't think necessarily this team controls its own destiny like maybe we thought it would. I think we had always kind of thought like
yeah,
if they go 2-0, the rest of the way they should be in. I don't know that Saturday changed that as much as it kind of woke everyone up to the reality that they need more help than maybe a lot of people thought they did. So, man, we'll see. But an interesting week ahead for Vanderbilt football. It's got to take care of business this week. And then it puts everything on the line at Neyland Stadium if that's the case. A huge, huge game for Vanderbilt football, one of its biggest. If everything goes to plan for the next, 6 days. Dylan, going to be an interesting couple of days. We'll have you covered this weekend. But thank you guys for watching. God bless. And man, what a time for Vanderbilt football where we're talking about playoff discussions. They're in the thick of it, but certainly might need some things to fall into place. We'll have the rest of that covered. Thank you guys for watching. God bless. Talk soon. Peace.